Welcome, everyone. I'm Lauren Trees, APQC's Principal Research Lead for KM, and I'm happy to be kicking off our June 2020 KM webinar, Connecting the Digital Workplace with Intelligent Search. And I've talked to so many of you about digital transformation and all of the new enabling technology that is rolling out or gaining speed over recent months. And I know that the toolkit is becoming even more top of mind for people as they deal with fast-moving change and the rise of remote work. So I think this topic is extremely timely today. So I just want to go through a few quick process notes before we get started. You can join the audio for this webinar through your computer or your phone. Either way, all of you as attendees are going to be in listen-only mode, so we won't hear your background noise, but we do want your comments and questions, and you can submit those throughout the webinar. You can share those in two ways. You can type them in the Q&A panel, and I'll be moderating that and trying to get to as many of your questions and comments as possible at the end of the webinar. Or you can also use the raise your hand feature. You see the little hand button on your GoToWebinar panel. If you click that, we'll know that you have a question that you want to ask live, and then we can go ahead and unmute your lines at the end of the call, and you can ask those questions. So just please be aware of that button. Click it if you'd like to have a question live, and don't click it if you don't have a question for live. We will also be sharing a copy of the slides and recording in a follow-up email if you want to review any of the material afterwards or if you have to step away for any reason. So without further ado, I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, Scott Parker, who is the Director of Product Marketing at Synaqua. And I'll let Scott introduce himself a little bit and tell him more about himself and the topic for today's call.
It's great. Thanks, Lauren. So I'm Scott Parker. I'm with Synaqua. I'm the Product Marketing Manager there. And Synaqua, we build and we sell a intelligent search platform, and I'm happy to be with you today for this very timely topic on connecting the digital workplace with intelligent search. So let's dive into it. The traditional workplace, as opposed to kind of this digital workplace that we're going to talk about, the traditional workplace is where employees tend to congregate Monday through Friday for 40 or more hours per week to produce work for a company, right? And if that sounds a bit antiquated to you, you're not alone, because there are these sort of powerful forces at work, both external and internal, listed here, that are relentlessly challenging the underlying principles of the traditional workplace. So perhaps the biggest threat to the notion of the traditional workplace is a digital mindset and the digital strategy. And as organizations continue to pursue initiatives around digitization, digitalization, and digital transformation, they often create new challenges for their employees to overcome. And many of these new challenges emanate from content and data that's accumulating quickly. It's accumulating constantly across various different isolated repositories, and the content and data is in different formats, and it's often in different languages. So for employees, navigating this complexity means wasted time, missed insights, and really lost opportunities to leverage that content and data on an almost daily basis. And the events of this year, right? What a year it's been, kind of incredible. We're only halfway through it, not even. The events have only exacerbated these issues. And if you kind of look back at some of the pre-crisis planning recommendations from just this past December, right? It makes the world of just 6 months ago seem kind of quaint. And when the pandemic really started to pick up back in March, the pre-crisis planning recommendations simply went out the window. Suddenly, every worker was remote and in need of a digital workplace. Oops. And oops. So all of this is leading organizations to increase focus on, and in many cases, accelerate their digital workplace strategy. As Gartner clearly stated back in 2017, the goal of the strategy is to boost employee engagement and agility through a more consumerized work environment. So let's unpack that a little bit. By boost employee engagement and agility, I take that to mean that employees should be empowered, they should be motivated to get the information they need and act on it in order to further the goals of their employer, of the organization. And by consumerized work environment, I take that to mean that the tools and resources provided to employees, they should seem familiar. They should seem like the tools that we all use outside of work. And this helps drive adoption and maximize the ongoing productivity of the employees. And Gartner even has a tidy building block diagram illustrating the various components necessary to enable and sustain an effective digital workplace. And if you note this information building block that just kind of popped in, highlighted in green, it describes data and content being delivered in context. And this is where Synequa's intelligent search comes in. So what is intelligent search and why should you care? Well, intelligent search is really a combination of capabilities that all work together to provide information from enterprise content and data. So for one thing, it provides information relevance that's tuned to user needs, and it can improve through self-learning over time. It can scale in multiple directions, actually, enabling many simultaneous end users to access relevant information and relevant insights from these huge, diverse volumes of content and data. It provides speedy response times, even in the most complex and demanding environments where time can literally be money. The user experience can be easily configured to accommodate specialty use cases. I'll show you a few in just a few minutes. And the analytics are automated wherever possible. This is important. This allows the machine to do the analysis while we humans apply our judgment and make the important decisions. So Synequa's intelligent search is designed to cohesively combine disparate technologies to enable an effective digital workplace. The platform provides smart connectors and converters to ingest all the enterprise content and data wherever it may be stored. It's been designed to cohesively combine various capabilities to automate the interpretation of meaning, and it's able to connect related information along topical lines. A big key here to connecting information and surfacing meaning is natural language processing, while also leveraging integrated machine learning and even deep learning technology to enhance and improve the search results and the relevance. And none of this would be useful without a well-designed presentation layer that's attractive and understandable in the sense that it makes use of the user's intuition. So let's take a look at how these capabilities benefit actual end users that are working in the digital workplace. Any knowledge-intensive organization of significant size either has a digital workplace or they're probably scrambling to establish one. The industry sectors that we see the most at Synequa are life sciences, financial services, and manufacturing. And the use cases that these organizations typically pursue, they span many functional domains. Some of the big ones are listed here. And for the first demonstration that I'm going to show you, I'm going to use a sales persona. And I'm going to walk you through a scenario that illustrates the power of intelligent search within the digital workplace. Okay, so this is Insight. It's a Synequa-powered information portal. It's actually used by all Synequa employees within our digital workplace. Personally, I find the tool extremely useful. It serves as a single point of access to all of the enterprise content and data to which I have access rights, so it's secure in that sense. And as you can see, it's personalized to me based on my previous activities, and it provides immediate access to documents I've recently opened, or maybe I've recently modified, provides access to my past queries, the enterprise applications that I use most frequently, etc. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to be a salesperson. I'll play the role of a salesperson preparing for an important client meeting. And as a salesperson, I know the client is interested in learning more about the new capabilities within our platform. And I'm going to use the Insight portal to query for information about this new capability. And since I know the specific system where the information should be, I'm going to add that to the natural language query. We store that on a system called Impact. It's an internal system. And when I mention that on Impact, Cinequa analyzes my query and it's able to recognize that specific system by using context. It knows about our environment. It's been trained about our environment. And the response is then pre-filtered to that system. That's an automated step for convenience. And it's also something that's visibly done, and it's something I can easily undo. I can easily back out of that if needed. But in this case, it was spot on. The first document returned is the one I'm looking for. So I click on that result. And as you can see here, clicking on a search result on Impact provides a rich preview of the relevant document, and I don't have to switch applications. So this helps me stay in the flow of my work. And it's just another way that Cinequa helps to boost productivity in the digital workplace. So I've got the information I need. I can get it up to speed on the latest feature that I want to be able to talk to the client about. Next step. Well, the next step is now I need to assemble a slide deck for my client meeting, right? Got to be ready with a slide deck. So I want to reuse existing slides as much as possible, and Cinequa makes this easy. There's, in fact, a dedicated tab here for slide content. And this is an embedded example of what we refer to as a search-based application. In fact, this particular capability, this was developed at the request of one of our customers, one of the largest consulting companies in the world, in fact, because they had, as you can imagine, they had a mess of PowerPoint slides and versions scattered all over the place. So as you can see here, Cinequa has served up the relevant slides based on my query. And I can immediately see things like how old they are and what deck they came from and so forth. So I simply select the slides I want to use. And when I'm done, I click on Export, and Cinequa will create my slide deck for me based on those slides. Again, Cinequa is making it simple and convenient to not only find what I need, but even take action to create derivative works. So Cinequa may give me 80% of the way there. I finalize the deck, I'm off in the flow of my task. Okay, so the last thing I need to do to prep for my client meeting is I need to find an expert who can come with me to the meeting. So I'm going to ask Cinequa. So note that by entering a query starting with who knows about, I'm signaling my intent that I'm looking for expertise, a person. So in the background, what's going on is a machine learning model is detecting that intent. So in addition to returning the documents related to the topic I'm asking about, Cinequa also highlights specific people in my organization based on their expertise, and namely based on their contribution to that topic, their digital footprint in the various documents and digital artifacts within the company. So glancing across the various experts highlighted, I decide to click on Eric. So Eric is the Director of Applications Design, and I'm pretty sure that's the guy that I need in my meeting. So by clicking on him, you can see here, I immediately get his contact info. It shows me more information about him, like his resume, his listing in the corporate directory, and as well as the key source of what led me to Eric, the documents that he's created. If I look at his network, which is the second image here, it shows me a network diagram, and more importantly, it shows me how Eric is connected to other people and other topics. This is automatically built by finding and extracting the relationships within the index. And that's another way that Cinequa structures unstructured content. And then lastly here, I can see on the statistics, I can see the analytics as well. So in this case, I can see Eric's activity over time on this topic. I can see where he's made contributions, his knowledge and connections to companies, people, maybe other projects he's been on. So there's a lot there that I can learn about even before I reach out to contact Eric. Okay, so one important point to highlight is that while I'm interacting with the Synequa solution, my usage, and all the other people using the system, it's being captured and it's being used behind the scenes to improve relevance over time. And what this does is it creates a virtuous cycle, because as the relevance is improved, that drives better user adoption. More people are interested in using the tool more often, and that provides obviously more usage information for the system to leverage for relevance improvements. Okay, so that's the sales example. Let's look at another example from the customer service domain. We do a lot in customer service, and an interesting one is to look at the call center agent. So many of the challenges faced in the call center are pretty well known. Remote work is threatening to make things worse. So imagine a lot of these call center employees, they have been home because of the crisis. They're really realizing what works, what doesn't. But if you consider any one of these challenges listed on this chart from the perspective of the call center agent, it's pretty easy to imagine how that particular challenge gets exacerbated when they're in a remote context without a proper digital workplace, right? The systems are complex. That hurts employee engagement. They get frustrated. Maybe they decide to leave the job, right? So there's interrelationship here. Or training's hard. You know, they don't have access to the books, so they don't have easy access to the agent in the next desk over, who might have been here for many years potentially, to quickly ask a question. So those are just kind of a couple of examples of how these challenges, which already exist in call center environments, are being exacerbated in a remote context. Okay, so the best way to illustrate the benefits of intelligent search in a digital call center is to look at the various stages of the employee journey. So starting with onboarding. So here, HR has a unified view of new employees with all their experience, their skills, and any potential gaps to be addressed to enable a more personalized onboarding experience. Their initial training can be greatly simplified just by focusing on a single user experience for information retrieval, right? They don't have to learn, at least not out of the gate, 15 systems to access information. They can learn one. Once the employee is on the floor serving customers, their ability to provide the right information quickly has a direct positive impact on both the bottom line in terms of cost savings, but also potentially the top line in terms of customer satisfaction. Now, as the employee continues working productively with minimal frustration, since they can avoid the daunting task of interacting with multiple disparate systems, that benefit continues, and the on-the-job training becomes much simpler. And then, if and when the employee does decide to leave, their exit can be managed much more seamlessly, because HR, again, has a unified view of their profile. They can easily see maybe what skill set needs to be replaced. What gap is this particular employee leaving in the organization? Okay. So it's probably not a surprise to anyone that the call center, or for even a moderately complex product or service organization, has at least a half a dozen applications that a customer service representative or a call center agent needs to consult regularly for information. This has to be made as easy as possible for the employee experience, but it's probably even more critical for the customer experience that's interacting with that service center. The economics are clear. They're well understood. They're probably better understood here than any other functional area of business when it comes to KPIs, key performance indicators. Metrics like time to proficiency, average handling time, first call resolution, and even net promoter score. These have all been used as performance indicators in customer service for decades, and they are easily measured. So let's briefly dive into a real-world example. SFR. If you haven't heard of SFR, they're a French mobile communications company. They serve millions of households in France. And as of 5 years ago, when we started to work with them, they had about 22 million customers in metropolitan France for mobile services, and another 6+ million households that were using them for high-speed internet access. And if you kind of look at the case study here, it's a very good example of the positive impact that intelligent search can have on a customer service organization running in a digital workplace. So prior to deploying Synequa, the agents were accessing lots of applications, 5 to 15 just for a given call. And they were providing service in a very tentative way, reflected in the metrics I mentioned, first call resolution and average call handling time to note two. They were never quite sure where to find the information or whether the answers that they were giving were accurate or not. And with Synequa, the agents were trained quickly. So they got up to speed quickly with confidence. They had fast and easy access to information with a user experience that was quite similar to the technology that they used outside of work. Remember that consumerized tool attribute. It's really important that they feel comfortable kind of getting around in that environment. Okay, so that's a quick tour of what intelligent search in the digital workplace for call centers look like. Let's go over a couple of the entry points that we advise new customers starting out with Synequa. So our customers typically don't tackle all their Synequa projects at once. And there's an almost natural rollout of applications over time, and a pattern that we've seen our own customers kind of adhere to over time, sort of naturally. And there are exceptions, of course, but most customers start with what I've been talking about, intelligent enterprise search, as their first project. And then they leverage that work for subsequent purpose-built, what we call intelligent search applications over time. And you have some of them here. It can span from content discovery, investigative work, maybe for fraud or intelligence, corporate intelligence, government intelligence. We do a lot in regulatory and safety, and related to that, discovering sensitive data, organizations using this sort of technology for accelerate their GDPR compliance. Of course, find the expert is a core component here. And this whole idea of unified views of a customer, bringing all the information we have about a customer, or bringing all the information we have about a product or a project in order to accelerate things and keep people in the flow of their work. Synequa is one of the only platforms on the market that's able to scale to any type of project like this. And there's an interesting economic argument for this dynamic. So let me walk you through it. So let's just take a single enterprise document and assume that the value on the left here that the organization gets from that one document, just talking about one document here, let's assume the value of that document justifies the cost to create, to store, and even manage that document. So from an ROI perspective, the ROI for that one document is break even. And because Synequa's platform serves as a foundation for these intelligent search applications that can address a wide range of use cases, that means that every one of these applications securely leverages the same index, which minimizes its footprint. There's not an index for every application. There's one index, multiple applications, and that maximizes efficiency. And what does this mean from an economics perspective is that for every project deployed on the Synequa platform, the cost, the unit cost per document stays roughly the same, but the value on average for a single document increases, and it's often significant, right? Because those documents, they're used in many different applications potentially. So that's kind of the economics of intelligent search. Okay, so been talking a little bit about Synequa, but why Synequa in particular? So Synequa's platform is complete. Organizations that are pursuing intelligent search as part of a digital workplace initiative, they want to realize value quickly, and they're looking for comprehensive packaged technology and solutions that help them move quickly without sacrificing context or quality. And by adopting a unified platform, these organizations can shield themselves from the cost and the complexity of IT integration. Adopting a complete solution also means they don't have to purchase a point solution, back to the economic argument, whenever new business requirements arise. Instead, they can leverage a unified end-to-end platform to configure applications, configure them quickly, and configure them in a way that's specifically aligned to business goals. Synequa's technology is proven. Our customers deserve proven technology that can handle critical projects and continually accommodate additional projects as the organization grows and they start to realize the deep benefits of intelligent search. Proven technology avoids the pains and the inefficiencies that accompany a trial and error approach, because proven technology, by definition, it's been forged by experience with other organizations with similar goals. And in Synequa's case, these organizations are typically pursuing complex projects in very heterogeneous environments full of large and diverse content and data volumes. Also, another reason why Synequa, according to the major analyst firms at least, Synequa is a leader in our market, and we've been a leader reliably for the latter half of the last decade. We've seen other vendors come and go from this leadership status, and Synequa has remained. And the last thing I'll say as a kind of a final proof point for Synequa is that we serve many global 2000 organizations, some of whom are listed on this chart. These organizations have partnered with us. They've trusted Synequa to enable their journey, and they come back and they continue to invest in Synequa on a regular basis. So I think that's a lot of times where the rubber hits the road. But now I'll turn it back over to Lauren to facilitate any questions. Lauren?
Hi, Scott. So we've had a few questions come in. We've got lots of time for questions, and I know people will start to put those into the Q&A. But let's get started with some that have come in already. So here's one that just popped in. How is this platform, how does it work along with AI and smart tools in Office 365, since it is now the core of digitization strategy for many corporations?
Yep, fair point. So there are a couple ways to answer that question. I'll start with the AI part. You know, Microsoft and even other vendors have created and published these cognitive or AI services that can help to enrich data. They can help to translate into different languages. They can help to annotate images. I mean, it's pretty much limited to your imagination what these cognitive services can do. Synequa's platform is very integration friendly. So at ingestion time, or even once the index has been formed, these external cognitive services can be leveraged to enrich the Synequa index. As I mentioned during the talk, we also have our own integrated deep learning and machine learning technology with kind of an entire DevOps environment where our goal is to make it as easy as possible for a Synequa administrator to deploy machine learning algorithms, to take existing Synequa machine learning algorithms and leverage them for different use cases. And you know, specific to Office 365, Microsoft's a partner of ours. You know, we leverage a lot of their cognitive services. We have connectors for most, if not all, of the Microsoft repositories. And the beauty of Cinequa in an environment like that is we're pretty agnostic. You know, there are going to be, in any significantly complex enterprise, there are going to be non-Microsoft systems. So the ability to kind of leverage what Microsoft has, but also bring in content and data from other sources, and you know, keep a little bit of distance from getting locked into that particular ecosystem, we feel is an advantage for Cinequa in that environment.
Great. So we've had a couple of different questions come in around security of information. So how do you ensure that the right departments and the right people are granted access only to the information that they should see or legally can see for their specific role?
Sure. Yeah, so Cinequa is enterprise grade. You know, we wouldn't be in business if we didn't ensure that the information was safeguarded. And the way we do that is, in addition to ingesting the content and data that I've been talking about, we also, at the same time, ingest the access control rights for the documents. We even do it down to the field level. Some repositories have, you know, field level security, and that information lives in the index with the relevant content. We've also, obviously, we've crawled the directory, so we know what roles people have, what permissions are associated with those roles, and we're able to reconcile that to make sure that the people that are logged into Cinequa only have access to the information that they have access to in the source systems. And it's tricky, you know, people, they want to try and fish using the autocomplete. Even a feature in Cinequa like the autocomplete is locked down, so you can't go, you know, fishing to see if you know, your boss's salary information is online or anything like that.
So I have a question here. Is the platform self-hosted or offered in the public cloud? Can you just talk about the hosting?
Sure, yeah. Today, Cinequa doesn't host the platform. Our customers host the platform. They either host it on premise. A lot of our customers, depending on the industry and sort of their, typically it's their kind of regulatory responsibilities, they either host it on premise or they can host it in one of the clouds. You know, we have a lot of customers on Azure, we have a lot of customers on AWS, doesn't really matter to us. One thing that's fairly unique about Cinequa is the situation where a hybrid, where a lot of these big customers that we have, they're in the middle of a multi-year cloud migration. So Cinequa has this distributed indexing feature that's, you know, been built in from the ground up that allows Cinequa to live both on premise and in the cloud, and the index kind of spans both. It really is useful for companies in that migration status, because what it means is they can kind of move data around and do migration, and the end users are not affected. If they're using Cinequa to access the data, they shouldn't have to care whether it's still on premise or in the cloud or whatever. It's also pretty seamless from the administrator's perspective, because on the back end, those systems are cognizant of each other and able to be administrated as a kind of a unified solution.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions that I think are all related to that, so I want to kind of go through those. So one of them is, do employees use it directly from Cinequa? So I think that's sort of also related to how these pieces come together. And then also, is Cinequa developed on top of a content management system or as a standalone system? So I think maybe just a little bit of clarity of how those puzzle pieces fit together would be good here.
Yeah, sure. Wish I had my favorite architecture slide, but let me give it a verbal shot here. So Cinequa is a standalone piece of software. It's you know, it's like I said, it's distributed. You can have multiple nodes. The nodes can be set to be you know, ingestion only, which means they're just indexing content using connectors. We have a broad portfolio, somewhere around 200 connectors to really almost all of the enterprise repositories that most companies use. So those ingestion nodes are out there. They're constantly crawling and indexing the content and the data and efficiently storing in our index. The other type of node is a query node, and that's where the users come. In a very small deployment, those nodes might be the same thing. They might be doing indexing and querying. Typically, we like to separate them in a more sophisticated architecture because obviously, we don't want the performance to be degraded on either end. But that's the general idea. It's a standalone software. It's built as I would call it, kind of a scaffolding around all your data, which allows you to have a nice clean slate. You don't really have to worry about where the data is stored. That really becomes metadata in a search solution like Cinequa that can be leveraged. Some systems are more validated than others. Some are more of a kind of a bazaar, marketplace for all kinds of content. But Cinequa can bring the content together, kind of refactor it along topical lines, and really, meet those use cases, kind of like the ones I talked about around customer service, sales, lots of different functional domains being served by this type of solution.
So I think a great follow-on question to that is, how would Cinequa leverage an existing corporate taxonomy to improve search? So in terms of the indexing and tools that you have, how would an existing taxonomy work with that or interface?
Sure. Yeah, it's one of the first steps of a Cinequa deployment is to find out what does the organization have. Some organizations, they have very simple things. They might have a dictionary of common terms that are specific to their organization. They might have a taxonomy, as you mentioned. They might even have an ontology that they build or even paid for their specific maybe vertical business domain. Any of those artifacts are typically infused into the Cinequa workflow and used to enrich the data for anything from expanding acronyms to, like I said, having definitions like synonyms that are specific to an organization, all the way out to concepts. Like I mentioned in the demo, we have a system that we called Impact. Well, how does it know? How does the system know that Impact is our internal repository? It's because we taught it that. We taught it that when we configured the solution for ourselves in this case.
So we did have a couple of questions come in around the teaching and the training of the system, around how long it takes to kind of get the system to know to know that. And so I think if you could speak to kind of the training process, the time and effort that's involved there, that would cover a couple of these questions here.
Yeah, sure. So, well, I always like to start, the end user training is non-existent for Cinequa. There is no end user training. I mean, one of the goals is it's supposed to be consumerized, is the word that I've been using. But administrators do have to be trained. We do a lot of training. We have a Cinequa University, in fact, that we support because of the way we go to market with our partners, systems integrators, and so forth. We do have customers that roll their own. They do their own deployments. They can also use the Cinequa resources. They can have training on premise. It's about a week long, or we can set it up somewhere else. In terms of kind of the time to deployment or time to production, obviously it varies. But it's usually a lot shorter than people imagine, especially people that come from a data migration background. Remember, Cinequa ultimately is a data in place solution. We're not moving data to, we're indexing it where it lives, we're enriching it, we're kind of connecting it along topical lines. So a very basic Cinequa deployment around intelligent enterprise search might just take a couple months, including the user acceptance testing. A more sophisticated application might take longer than that. It likely will take longer than that. And then the key is it really fits well with the agile software development methodology because you're never quite done, right? That usage information can be consulted either manually, through our administrator interface to see kind of what's been happening, or as I mentioned, it can be done automatically over time in a most sophisticated deployment through machine learning, kind of watching those behavioral logs and making, drawing some conclusions. So it's never quite done, but the initial implementations, I'd say, 3 to 9 months with kind of that iterative agile mindset for, constant and consistent improvement over time.
So I think a good follow-up question on that is how well can it digest highly technical vocabularies? So sort of terminology of specific industries or disciplines.
Yep, yeah. So Cinequa out of the box is pretty sophisticated. I think because of our, we're a little bit different than most search companies, just because our roots were in, the technology started as a linguistics project in Europe. And so, it's not just some, open source project that somebody downloaded. It's really at the root of it, it's a linguistics engine. We have deep natural language processing support in over 20 languages, and that kind of allows a lot of intelligence just out of the gate for common vernaculars, what we typically think of. When you start getting into like scientific domains or financial services domains or even manufacturing domains, that's when we start to rely on some of our partnerships, with companies like SciBite, for example, for scientific terminology, right? Their vocabulary and their ontology can be used to recognize these scientific concepts and tag them and enrich them as part of the Cinequa ingestion process to kind of set up the end user to be able to have those more sophisticated interactions with that more sophisticated language in those environments.
So based on your implementation experience for different firms, do you see them adopt a common user interface for search, or do they insist on customizing the user interface for their organization? And what are your recommendations around that?
Yeah, we've seen both, in fact, and we've actually responded to it in the latest version of the product by moving to Angular, which has kind of become the industry standard for component-based user interface development. We've even gone so far as to open source some of that so our partners can share those components and really quickly get to sort of best practices. So yeah, I think the best thing to do, again, is get started, use the out-of-the-box components. We support a lot of the more common use cases out of the box, clearly enterprise search, find the expert, 360-degree views. I think where most of our customers start to get into custom is when you're in a custom use case environment, right? An aerospace manufacturer customer that's trying to help an engineer that's crawling around in a fuselage, making repairs with sort of a screen on their glasses. That's going to be a very custom search interface, obviously, because they can't use their hands. That's probably the most sophisticated example I can think of right now. But I would advise, yeah, just start with what's provided. You're going to get the quickest, the low-hanging fruit, the quickest time to value, and then see where you are. And again, the nice thing about the Angular is that the ability to kind of merge in your own components is getting more and more useful and valuable.
So I think kind of you were mentioning the search applications. So how are intelligent search applications developed? Does Cinequa develop that with us, or is there some kind of SDK or API that IT would leverage? Do you need a consultant? So can you just talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with Cinequa. Yes, of course, we have services we provide. We actually have a dedicated design and build practice that we provision and provide our customers if they want to do something. And it does help to have that Cinequa expertise. But like I said, we also have a worldwide, literally a worldwide network of integration partners that have been trained in Cinequa, that have access to Cinequa University, have access to our GitHub repository. So there are people, wherever you are in the world that you can consult around this. So you have a lot of options. And last thing I'll say is, some of our customers, they have the right skill sets in-house, so they'll send their people to our training. Those are the customers that typically will commission our design and build service just to get that initial infusion of Cinequa expertise. And that's really valuable because they learn from our folks, but then they also have a a nice artifact to continue to feed and nurture in their implementation.
So a little bit of a different question. In your call center example, you show reps accessing information from different systems. Does your solution allow reps to go into those applications to perform tasks? Generally, call center reps need to input something or perform a transaction in different systems.
Yeah, that's becoming more and more the trend. I showed the simple example in the sales with creating a PowerPoint. What I didn't show was the ability to reach out through Slack and contact people. But that's really the trend. It's search and act. And I'd say the answer really depends on the system that we're trying to act in. If that system has been built to have programmatic access to all these things, absolutely, it's something that can be designed and built into the Synequa interface, again, to keep those employees in the flow of their work. There are still some systems out there that don't have that type of capability, or they weren't built for that type of programmatic access. So I think the answer is yes when possible, but your mileage may vary depending on the investments you've already made in your IT shop.
So I know you addressed this a little bit specifically with the Office 365 earlier, but this question is, what are the base capabilities companies can use with Synequa, i.e. if they already have it, how does it work with other applications? So I don't know if you want to speak to that a little more generally.
Yeah, I think of Synequa as an immersive technology. Not to pick on anybody, but an application like Salesforce, where you go to Salesforce, you log in, you do stuff there. CRM in general, right? Same thing with ERP systems, even content management systems. You kind of go to those systems and you do discrete things. Synequa is different. It's kind of the inverse of that. Synequa is immersed. Of course, it's calling an index on all your data and content, so it's aware of the kind of content. It can link experts and do all kinds of things there. It also provides increasingly a lot of touch points, and the reason for that I already mentioned is to keep people in the flow. If they're in Synequa, they can do things in these external systems, but also if they're in these external systems, they can access Synequa. We have a great example, I didn't have time to show it, of being in Slack. And we have this Insight bot. An Insight bot is a question and answer system that we have an example where we can consult our own corpus, our own index, which is Insight, the tool I showed you, using this Insight bot. And that's a great example of contextualization. Slack isn't built to show me a long list of results or even a list of people. Slack is built in a Q&A sense. And so there's an example of Synequa contextualizing itself to, in that case, in that example, the Slack environment. But that's the kind of immersion that's really starting to take off, and I think that's becoming an increasingly valuable part of the insight or the intelligent search arena.
No, that's great. And we had a question, does Synequa allow users to develop content? I think you've kind of answered that. The content lives where it lives, and you guys are kind of pulling those things together. Is that
right? Fair? We're the echo chamber, right?
Yeah. So I have a question. I want to see if I can get this right. So they're asking, that they have a specific KM system already that they want employees to go in and interact with, ask questions, and so I think they're asking how a tool like Synequa, would interact with an existing KM system that has things like communities of practice and a wiki and, collaboration capabilities, whatever those sort of that portfolio of items, and how you see that integrating or bolting onto that in various ways.
Yeah. Well, I mean, clearly Synequa would be the information access component of all of those things. And to the extent, depending on what you're using, it could be exposed as a touch point within those things. You could have a Synequa bot in your community where you want to access certain KB articles or whatever. But the way I think of it is in any kind of KM system, you kind of have the left screen, right screen paradigm, even if they're not physical screens. The left screen is getting the information you need. whether it be about the customer, like who am I talking to, or the product or service they're calling about. And then you've got the right screen view, which is, okay, I'm now going to do something. I'm going to create a support ticket. I'm going to log this question that has never been asked before, so that somebody in the background can go and chase down the answer. So I think, kind of at a fundamental level, that's, Synequa powers that left screen, but you have to keep in mind, there are touch points, and there are other ways now to immerse Synequa in your KM solution. And really, it comes down to, do you want that richness? Do you want to kind of, optimize the performance of the person sitting at the screen, so they don't have to think through, okay, well, what are the other ways I could search for this? What are the acronyms? What are the synonyms? What are the connections? Who's the expert that I might need to forward the call to next in a situation where I have to escalate? And that's really the richness that the contextualization and the personalization type of capability that Synequa is going to bring.
So I had a couple of questions about how the platform is priced and how that scales. I'm sure you don't want to get into the details here, but I don't know if there's some specific information that you could, or some general information you could provide to help kind of give some guidance on that.
Sure. Synequa's pretty basic pricing, actually. It's based on the volume of content and data that's ingested. The idea is that, and we've seen this with our longtime customers that have really kind of caught on to the value of intelligent search and what our platform can do, and that economic argument that I highlighted during the presentation. So, as we price, because we price on the volume and the content, that means that anybody can use it. There's no kind of seat license restriction. It doesn't really matter how often you use it. There's no pricing based on usage. It's really how much data and content that really is the value. I mean, that's the stuff that we're optimizing with our platform, with our natural language processing, with our immersive user experience in those applications like I showed you. So the pricing is actually pretty straightforward, and we like to think it's pretty well aligned with the value you're going to get from Synequa.
So I have a question here. Sometimes a better search tool just surfaces a bunch of older junk you don't want people relying on. How do you manage the content lifecycle to avoid that? So I don't know if you can speak to how Synequa kind of deals with that piece.
Yeah, there are so many things there. I could do an entire, maybe we do a sequel, we could do an entire sort of webinar on relevance and how to manage that. But I'll say a couple things. Everything's a signal, and the last time that document was updated, maybe the amount of people that are updating that document, even the links to it, kind of like the page rank that Google started out with. I mean, all of those techniques are valid. In an enterprise environment, you can do even more because all the users are logged in, so you can have a distributed governance model where you can trust your users to tag something. Hey, this is bad. This is out of date. That's really important in a regulatory context, right? Where you might have information about a medical device that is out of date and would literally get you into big trouble with a regulator if somebody found it. So you can have this distributed governance model. You can limit it to just a specific number of users. And there's so much more we're doing with relevancy. One more thing I'll mention, we have a relevance feedback model baked into the platform, which the way I like to think of it, it allows you to scale knowledge, basically. If you use the call center if we stick with that example, you got the guy or the gal that's been there for 20 years teaching the system how to think about relevance. That's directly benefiting the guy that just got hired last week, right? In terms of information access and what's relevant and what should be returned for given queries, even if they might be phrased somewhat differently. So yeah, there's a lot there, but those are just some ideas kind of off the top of my head.
Great. So does the search tool also have a built-in analytics dashboard showing key statistics like trending keywords, documents, users, and so on? So if you can kind of speak to the analytics a bit.
Yeah. It got too long. We used to talk about, it's gone through so many names, cognitive search and analytics. Today I was talking about it in terms of intelligent search. Gartner actually refers to it as insight engines. But that's a key part. I mean, analytics and search, especially when it comes to so-called unstructured data, text, is so important. I mean, I didn't show you in the tool today, but we support basically at a component level heat maps, timelines. I mean, anywhere where we either have the structure, the metadata, or we can infer it through our NLP. We can start to put that data on a dashboard, and definitely on the back end, the administrators have a lot of that data on usage, and we can expose that. We have exposed that. We've worked with customers to build search-based applications that expose that to the end users in certain cases. So yeah, deep analytics, I would call it content analytics to kind of differentiate it from a lot of the BI tools that are out there that only focus on kind of numbers and structured data. Search and content analytics is much more focused on that text and that unstructured data.
And then I guess related to that, do you also help organizations compute ROI from the use of the search engine?
Glad you asked. Absolutely. I think we're in probably the best position to do that because we work with organizations in different industries with different ways of calculating ROI. So we actually offer that in our sales cycle. We'll work with organizations to kind of show them what other organizations have done without divulging anything, just kind of the structure of how they think about search ROI. And yeah, we've got consultants that are very good about helping to kind of craft that message. And then what we like to do is we like to follow up, after production and see what the story looks like and make sure that those goals are being accomplished.
Great, and I think we've got time for one more question, so I will stick with this theme. In your opinion, what department would benefit the most from introducing SyneQuA? Compliance, customer support? I'm trying to understand where we would expect to see ROI the fastest.
Oh boy, yeah.
I'll end with a doozy for you.
Yeah, I wish I could ask that person some follow-up questions, make it more of a dialogue, and maybe we can do that. Well, the one thing about customer support that I sort of mentioned, it is so quantifiable. Those metrics around that I mentioned are so well established. So I think you'll never go wrong with optimizing your customer support. And because, it's cost savings, it's also potentially revenue when you start boosting your customer satisfaction through responsiveness and better first call resolution. So if I had to pick, I'd say that's a good one. The compliance is hot. Data privacy, we didn't really even think about it a couple of years ago until a customer came to us, a law firm in Northern Europe, and said, "Hey, we just used your tool because we had all this enterprise content and data index. We just used your tool to reply to a regulator and basically avoid a GDPR fine." So depending on how you think about that, that can be tremendous value if you're avoiding that. It's just not as, it's a little more abstract, and it's more of a risk-based ROI approach than like a customer service would be, where you've really got those daily metrics to adhere to.
Yeah, cost avoidance. It's always a tricky one in KM.
Yes, yeah. And I guess the best answer is do both. Same index.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to conclude. We are at time. Thank you so much, Scott, and thank you everyone for your participation and great questions. People are saying, can we get a copy of the webinar? You will absolutely get a copy of the slides and the recording in a follow-up email to all of our attendees. So thank you so much, Scott, and thanks everybody, and I hope to see you all next month.
Thank you.